I'll talk about the characteristics between the different types of batteries, so you know which one to use, because there is not such a thing as sort of the ideal battery for everything. It's horses for courses. And how to use them. All right, so what are the characteristics that we should look at if we decide which battery to use? First of all, the specific energy, the volumetric and the gravimetric specific energy. I'll talk about that later. I'll just sort of give you the list of all the things. The power density and the energy density. There may be some people among you that think that's the same. Well, it's not, but I'll explain that. Energy efficiency, the safety of battery, which is an important point. Disposability, toxicity. Now, you may not sort of normally think about that when you buy some batteries, but these things are going to last a number of years, and the regulations may change. There may be some nasty stuff in there that when you want to get rid of it, you're going to have a hard time. Give you an example of this, of another material. Just a couple of months ago, or actually it's been a bit longer, I changed my carport, built a new carport, but the old carport had some asbestos sheets on there. Now, my cost to get rid of the asbestos was higher than what the guy paid for them when they were new. Just getting rid of it. So, just consider it as well. The cost and availability, and also the lifespan of batteries, battery degradation. Why don't batteries last forever? All right, now I'll zoom in on the different subjects, more specific. The volumetric, gravimetric specific energy. Now the volumetric specific energy is if you have a certain volume, say a liter, which is 10 by 10 by 10 centimeters, how much energy can you get in there? And then you can see that different batteries types have sort of different amount of energy that you can have in the same volume. Of course, if you have to have a battery in a tight place, like a mobile phone or so, that's pretty important. And then there's also the gravimetric, which is almost the same, but now you look at the weight. How heavy is it? If you have a battery of 1 kilo, how much energy can you get in there? And then let me go back. Yeah. You see that the different chemistries have sort of different gravimetric specific energy. This chart shows it a bit more specific, and also the difference between power and energy. What's the difference, if you talk about battery, between power and energy? Here I have a graph with different battery chemistries. This is lithium ones, nickel metal hydride, lead acid. I even have something that's not a battery. This is a supercapacitor. But this is interesting to see where they would fit on the chart. Now, the energy of a battery is how long can you run something on that battery. So how much energy is there in there? Right? The power of a battery is how quickly can you get that energy out of that battery. If you compare it with, say, a bottle of water, and the water is the amount of energy, right? Then the energy is how much water you can get into that bottle. And the power is how big is the opening. How quickly, if you turn around, you can get it all out. And that, if your battery has to be more of a power or energy battery, depends on your application. If you have, for instance, a battery that fits in the clock on the wall like that one there, that's a typical energy battery, because the amount of current is very small, but you want it to last as long as possible. the battery in your car, the lead acid battery that starts your engine, that would be a specific power battery, because that battery only has to give energy maybe 6 seconds. If you crank your engine, it has to give maybe a few hundred amps to sort of get the engine through its combustion cycle. And yeah, let me think. Power energy. Here I have actually a few batteries. You see the lithium. Here's a lithium one, another lithium one. Here this one has very high energy, but low power. And you can also have lithium batteries that have higher power. And I'll explain a bit later that you can have actually energy batteries or power batteries that are of the same chemistry. So it's not that a power battery or an energy battery has different chemistries. They can have the same chemistry. Let me see if I had more of that on there. Energy cell. Yeah. All right, the next one. Energy efficiency. The amount of energy that you put in when you charge the battery, right? The amount of kilowatt hours. How much of that can you get out of it again? If you charge a battery, oh, wrong button. This is sort of the charge cycle. Oh,
sorry.
Oh. Did you? All right, that's okay. If you charge a battery, you see that, let me make sure that I press the right button, that you have to apply a higher voltage to get the current in. But when you discharge it, the voltage is lower. Now, although you may get the same number of amp hours in there as that you get out, the fact that there's a different voltage means that there's a different amount of energy that you put in as what you get out, because the energy is the amp hours times the voltage. And if the voltage is higher when you charge than when you discharge, there's more energy that you put in than you get out. And that difference, what you see here, that 70% here, that's sort of the efficiency of the battery. Now, it's not only that you would waste that energy, because you may say, well, a bit more amp hours out of the grid doesn't bother me. But the thing too is that energy that's got to go somewhere, and that often is because I think it was the first or second law of thermodynamics that energy is never lost, it just moves somewhere else. Now, where does this energy move? Most of it is turned into heat. It heats up your battery. If you charge a battery, you feel it is warmer than, and that's that different, that 30% there. Now, the thing is that you have to sort of consider that, because if batteries heat up, and I will talk about that later, it has an effect on their lifetime. They may not like it as much. Now, safety, particularly with lithium ion batteries, and actually also with other kinds of batteries, you have to consider them as and the world also considers them as dangerous goods. And you find out about that, and I found that out a couple of months ago when I ordered a number of them from China, that first of all, they are not allowed to be transported by air. they don't want that. So it's going to be sea transport. And second is that all the shippers sort of make use of it, and they charge you extra. They call it, what do they call it? Some premium, danger premium. They put a dangerous goods premium on there. And I bought sort of 2 boxes, one and a half box of lithium batteries, and the total amount of extra that I had to pay was about $500. Right. Now, on the other hand, other types of batteries like lead acid, I mean, there's nasty acid in there. I mean, you don't want to get that in splashing in your eyes. So dangerous goods. This well, you can get accidental short circuit. Maybe I've heard a story once that somebody was mounting the connection between them, and they made a short with a spanner. Well, they know that they're dangerous. Yeah, the acid is very corrosive, and the lithium ion ones, they're flammable. Got this little, maybe Eric, can you play the video, or would that be possible? How do I do this? Anyway, I have this little video. Yeah? This is a battery out of a telephone. You see it? Now you all have that in your pockets, probably.
Something to look forward to.
Now the thing is, what I should add here is that it's a bit like firecrackers. I mean, what's a firecracker is a little bit of gunpowder, you know, rolled up in some paper, right? They're not really considered that dangerous unless you fire them up right in front of your eye. But the same stuff in a pressure cooker can have quite a different effect. So if, say, a battery like this is acceptable in a small form like that, then you would say, okay, that could be considered acceptable. But imagine that you have sort of that kind of battery, this big, right, say maybe 20 kilowatt hours of it, and instead of a knife, it's just another car just hitting you from behind, right? So safety is something that you have to consider if you choose the type of battery. All right. Now, I'll concentrate on the lithium-ion batteries at the moment. There's not just one lithium-ion battery. There's many different ones here, and they have different characteristics. This is a lithium cobalt oxide, lithium manganese oxide, this is lithium nickel manganese cobalt, which is a combination of these two. This is the one that most people here sort of favor, the lithium iron phosphate. Lithium nickel cobalt aluminium and the lithium titanite oxide. And if you look at these different ones, they have different cell voltages, right? Lithium phosphate is only 3.2 volts, where the other one is 3.6, 3.7. So these are sort of more your phone battery types. And now you understand the specific energy, what I talked about before, right? So how much energy can you get into a weight? And then you see that that these are around sort of 200, 220, Well, the lithium iron phosphate is only 120. So from the specific energy, these lithium iron phosphate are not as good as the other ones. Here's the lithium nickel cobalt one, is even better than that. And this one is actually the worst. So you would think, why people not all using that one? Well, then you have to look at the rest of the details that make sort of change your mind again. The charge and the discharge rate. Now, if we sort of compare these, for instance, the discharge rate, and this is what you need if you pull up from a traffic light, if you would have them in your car. Then all of a sudden, the lithium iron phosphate one, which had not such a big energy density, is a very good power cell. It can give you 25 C. Now the C stands for the capacity. If you have, say, a 10 amp hour cell, then this one could, for a short period of time, give you 25 times that, so 250 amps. While the other cells, like this one or that one, could only give you sort of 2C. So if you have an application where short periods of time you need a lot of current, you have to have one that has a high rating here. And that all of a sudden makes the lithium iron phosphate a better one again. The life cycle, now that's important too, because look at this one, 500 to 1,000, and lithium iron phosphate is sort of more than double that. It's not that you always want a battery that lasts as long as possible. Because if you are a company like Apple, you don't want a battery in your phone that lasts 10 years. You want it to fail after 2, because that's when your new model comes out and you want to give people an extra incentive to buy a new one. Right? But for cars, that would not be acceptable. Your battery sort of runs out after 2 years. So again, you sort of see that it's horses for courses. Another important thing is, for instance, the thermal runaway temperature. This says something about the safety. If batteries heat up, if you charge them quickly, or it's already hot outside and then you charge them quickly, right, you get temperature on top of temperature. And for some reason they reach that thermal runaway temperature, then the internal chemical reaction actually makes them even go hotter. After that, sort of the point of no return, and the chemical process actually generates more heat, and more heat actually gets that chemical reaction going even more, and you get the situation which you just saw in that little video. So the one with the highest runaway temperature will be one of the safest. And again, this sort of shows why the lithium iron phosphate is the popular one again. It's safe. It has a long lifetime relative to the other ones. It can give you a high current, but you have to pay for it in a lower specific energy. Now, I was interested in which car company actually uses what. What's in the Tesla? Now Tesla uses this one. And look at the difference in specific energy compared to the lithium iron phosphate. And now you also understand how they can get 85 kilowatt hours in a car.
And 400 miles,
right?
400 kilometers, and 400 kilometers.
But now, But look at the runaway temperature. This also explains why they are in the bottom of a car in a container filled with fluid to keep them cool. Because if you use these batteries, yes, you get a lot of energy. That's great. But don't get them hot. That's absolute no-no. The Leaf, the Volt and the BMW use that one. Lithium nickel, which is sort of pretty high as well. Has a higher runaway temperature. So it's a bit safer. Fairly good life cycle. But not as good at the discharge. Now you can do something about that. Because what does it say? You can actually get 2 times the cell capacity of current out of it. Now, if you have 10 amp hour cells, then that means you can get 20 amps out of them. But then, if you put a bigger battery in, if you put, say, 100 amp hour cells in there, right, then that means you can get 200 amps, because that will then be 2C. And that may be good enough. So you can pick this battery with a relatively low discharge rate, but then just get big cells so that C is a big number. This is the Mitsubishi EF. Now this is an interesting battery because it's the worst from a specific energy point of view. So there's the most battery, the biggest battery for the amount of energy, but that's the only disadvantage. The rest is all better. The discharge rate is good, right? Life cycle is excellent, and the runaway temperature is very high, so they're very safe. They last long, but they're huge. All right. Let me see, what else do I have? Okay. Now I'll tell you a bit about the battery. Now I promise not to go into the chemistry of it, but I'll just tell you a little bit so that I can explain in my next slide what to do and what not to do with your battery and why they don't last forever and how you can make them last as long as possible. This is in a schematic form the chemistry of a lithium iron phosphate battery. Oh. Wait a minute. Yeah, that one. Yeah, there's 2 buttons very close to each other. One side, the anode, is made of copper, and you can see that the terminal is sort of yellowish, and the other side is aluminium. Now, the copper side, they put some charcoal on there, and they put some fertilizer on the other hand. And that's how they're made. Now the carbon, it's graphite, and the way that graphite crystallizes, the way that that the graphite atoms sort of connect to each other are in sheets. They're very thin one-atom sheets, and that's why they use it, because the lithium ions, which are these things that go sort of back and forth when you charge and discharge, actually fit nice in between those sheets. You have to sort of think of it as a book with all the pages, and then the lithium ions actually go between the pages. On the other side is the cathode, made of an aluminium plate, and they have some phosphate, and that's what makes all the different types of lithium batteries, what I explained before, like the cobalt and the manganese and the titanite. And So that's this stuff that they change. That stays the same. Let me see. Now, if you discharge, the electrons go from the minus to the plus. A lot of people think, well, electricity goes from plus to minus, right? Well, electricity does, but the electrons go the opposite way. And then the ions, which are lithium atoms with an electron missing, and then they get a positive charge. That's why they're called ions. They're charged particles. They go into the phosphate, and if you charge them, they go the other way. The area where they travel through, that stuff between the two plates is filled with an electrolyte. In a lead acid battery, that's sort of the acid. And a lithium battery, that's some other stuff. And then in front of the carbon, after you charge that battery a few times out when they're new, a little solid layer gets deposited onto the anode, which is called the solid electrolyte interface. And that actually prevents some corrosion of the anode. Now, if I go to the next one, let me see if I... Oh yes, I've got something else. Now, how do you, if this is the chemistry, how do you make a cell that's more for power, and how do you make one that's more for energy? Now, if you make the carbon thicker, you can actually get more of these ions in between these pages. The more ions, more lithium ions you can get in there, the more energy. So then the capacity goes up. But if you want to discharge them quickly, these ions have to quickly travel from there to there. Now, if this one can only move across after that one has already gone. It's sort of queuing. And that takes a bit of time. And that means that this ion cannot go as fast across as that one. If instead of doing it this way, you get a bigger copper anode, make this a bit shorter, and have sort of these ions sort of between other sheets above there, then you can get a much bigger current out of that cell because all these ions can actually travel across immediately. They don't have to wait for one of them in front of them to get out. And that's sort of the difference between power cells and energy cells and everything in between, because you can make the thickness as big as you like, and but that's basically sort of what the difference is. So now another thing I should say with the amount of power is that you may say, well, I don't need that high current because I'm not such an aggressive driver. But you should also consider regenerative braking. If you go down a hill, you want to capture all that energy, and that energy can come very quickly at a high current. And then you quickly have to be able to, or your battery has to be able to digest that. All right, next one. Now, this is probably a very interesting slide because this says, why do batteries degrade? Why do they die? Why don't they last forever? And what can I do to sort of maximize their life? There are three things that are important. The first one is temperature. These batteries are very sensitive to temperature. If you use them at temperatures above 70 degrees, they grow old very quickly. Also, when they're very cold.
Is that centigrade?
What?
Centigrade. Yeah.
Yeah, Celsius.
Celsius.
I was just one American in the room. Celsius. Yeah, temperature. So keep the temperature of your batteries between about 10 and 55 degrees Celsius. It doesn't mean when you discharge them or charge them. If they're very cold, well then charge them very slowly. If they are actually below freezing, below that 0 degrees Celsius, then you shouldn't charge them at all. You have to warm them up first and then charge them. It's actually because, well, with chemical reaction, they're dependent on temperature. And if they're too cold, then the chemical reaction will not sort of do what it's supposed to do. And then if you force it with a high current, you just beat the shit out of them. They don't like that.
It's because of the aqueous electrolyte, isn't it?
Well, there's a couple of things. The electrolyte is a fluid, and it could possibly sort of
Got water in it.
get thicker.
It's got water in it.
Yeah, freeze. Above 70 degrees, they because what happens is that we all know that if something is hotter, corrosion goes quicker when the temperature goes up, and the cathode here can sort of corrode, and then the corrosion actually will also travel across, and it can actually create sort of a film on here, and that actually decreases the size of your plates there, and your battery capacity sort of goes down. Let me see. Charge and discharge rate. How quickly do you charge them? Now, you'll talk about fast charging, and but if you have the time at night to charge them slow, then it's better for batteries to charge them slower in sort of 4 to 6 hours. That's good. But if you say, "Oh, I'll get 80% within half an hour," I mean, it's not that they won't work anymore the next day, but they just grow older quickly. And instead of 2,000 charges, you get maybe 1,500 out of them. So the discharge rate and also the cell voltage. I found a graph on the internet where they did tests on a certain type of lithium battery, and they charged them up to a certain voltage. All right? This is the discharge capacity in milliamp hours. It was just a small battery they tested with, but the chemistry is the same. All right? And this one here, they charged them up to 4.25 volt. Now this is not a lithium iron phosphate. This is one of these other ones that have a 3.6 volt cell voltage. But the idea is the same. If you sort of charge them up to a higher voltage, then the number of cycles you get out of them is less than if you charge them up to a slightly lower voltage. And here's a lower, so this was 3.25 volts. This is 3.25, that one is 335, 345. So the higher the voltage, the quicker actually the capacity sort of drops. And that's because at these higher voltages, actually voltage, you can see voltage actually as a sort of a pressure to push these ions between those sheets of carbon. And it can actually pulverize those carbon sheets. And then they do not make an electrical contact with the anode anymore, and they just don't participate in being battery. Current graphite sheet. Oh yes, if you over discharge them, then what happens is that you can get dendrite growth inside this solid electrolyte interface. Dendrite are, it's like metal plating. I mean, if you know how to metal plate, you put sort of two metals in a bath that conducts electricity, you put a current through it, a DC current, and then the metal goes from one to the other. Now, that process is almost the same as what happens inside a battery, but you don't want that to happen. But if you discharge them too far, that can happen, and all these, and you can get little sort of metal hairs in there, and they create sort of internal short circuits. And that means that your internal resistance, well, the self-discharge goes up. Internal resistance also deteriorates. Let me see what else is there. Yeah, so to sort of conclude, if you want your lithium-ion batteries to last long, keep the temperature between sort of 10 and 55 as much as possible. If they're colder or warmer, let them sort of first get into that range before you use them. Charging them slowly is better than charging them quickly. And stay below the maximum charge voltage that the specification has given you, where you should stop charging. And then you can be assured of a long time that you can use the battery. Now, here's just a few graphs of the battery that I purchased in China 2 months ago. And you see this is the discharge at different temperatures. And you see that here you have sort of these three graphs where the voltage is sort of constant until they're sort of empty. These are 72 amp hour cells. Right? Now, these three colors are 25, 30, 40, and 55 degrees. That one is 10, and this is all colder. So you see that the fact that these curves are so far away from the proper ones, from these, that this will already tell you that the battery is actually not happy here. It's not working the way it's supposed to work, and that's just because of the temperature. So if you charge them quickly at these temperatures, you damage them. All right. Few discharge curves. Let me see. Now, if you discharge them at the high current, which is this one, you get also the same amp hours out of them, right? But at a much lower voltage. Now what this says is that compared to if you discharge them at a lower current. That means that you get more energy out of them if you discharge them sort of slowly, because the energy is the number of amp hours, right, this scale, times the voltage. Now what does this tell you is that if you select batteries for your car, if you get a bigger cell with higher amp hours, you do not only get those more amp hours out of them because it's a bigger cell, but you actually get more energy out of them because the voltage is higher for the same current. You get that? All right, this is a discharge cell. Well, this is sort of the same story, but the other way around when you discharge the cell. All right, this is my talk. Thanks for your attention. I hope you know about